So what we'll have in this case here is certain ethical prohibitions, and the person will experience guilt to the extent that he thinks about those prohibitions and they come in conflict with the natural human desires that manifest themselves, as they will manifest fairly regularly through life. But the idea is that the guilt that the person feels inside at a desire that he takes to be a bad desire will serve as a modifier internally on his behavior. We can do the same thing with revenge. The desire for revenge is going to be natural, but what we can then do when students get into conflict or children get into conflict and start taking matters into their own hands, dealing with the situations, is teach them that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. The idea being that taking vengeance or revenge or trying to deal with justice yourself is not something that you should do, that is the province of some other authority. Or we can teach students who are harmed, damaged by someone else, who are feeling strong desires for revenge to turn the other cheek. The idea being that instead of being harmed, taking matters into one's own hand and acting in a self-defense way to stop further harms, to take a defensive position and to try to deal with it through a pacifistic approach. Or we can say that forgiveness is a primary virtue, and that whenever anybody harms you, again, you should not seek revenge of any sort. Instead, one should forgive the person who has harmed you. Now, the purpose of all such formulations is the idea of controlling the natural desire for revenge by juxtaposing against it commandment, a moral commandment or a set of moral beliefs that are in direct conflict with it. This will, of course, set up an internal conflict within the individual and a certain amount of guilt, as there's a conflict between what he wants to do and what he thinks he should be doing. But again, hopefully his belief will prevail to a certain extent and moderate the behavior that's an undesirable behavior. So we have prohibitions based on guilt as internalized moral checks, and our moral code then should emphasize strongly prohibitions. The problem we have is people doing too many things that we think are bad things. We want to have an ethics that is focused on controlling or restraining or stopping the kind of self-interested behavior as described here from manifesting itself, so that society can, to some extent, flourish. Now, the point of all of these things is that to the extent one acts on the basis of them, all of these things do involve a certain amount of renunciation. Right? If I'm going to be a good person according to this moral code, I have to not act on my greed, not act on my lust, not act on my desire for revenge. All of these things involve a certain amount of sacrifice, on my part. Supposing I have the power, as Gyges has, to the extent that I could satisfy all of my desires at the expense of other people, I have to give up those, the satisfaction of those desires. To the extent that I give up all of those things, there's a certain amount of suffering, that is going to ensue to the individual. I really, really want to satisfy my lust, but I don't satisfy my lust. There are psycho and physiological consequences that are painful if one does not act on the basis of that. Or going without something that one really wants, or giving up a strongly felt desire for revenge. All of that involves, at least in a transitional time, a certain amount of suffering. But the point of all of this is that if the individual engages in the renunciation, the sacrifice, and the suffering, while he does not benefit directly from that behavior, other people benefit from that behavior. That is to say, they don't suffer the consequences, and social living can go on, and that is judged to be the more important value. So what we have here is ethical principle number 3. I'm just going to write the formulation down, and then I'll assign a label here, which is to say the primary goal in life is for individuals to sacrifice for the sake of others in society. Okay. Now, this is a primary ethical goal here. What we're then saying is the most important thing is the maintenance and fostering and flourishing of society. Since we think individual human nature, what makes an individual flourish and what makes an individual individual happy and satisfied is in conflict with the needs of society, then the first ethical imperative is going to be one of sacrifice. Right? The individual has to sacrifice to the extent that is necessary for the sake of others in society. And so then we have the individual being sacrificed, right, for the sake of others in society. That label we can give the traditional label here of altruism. Again, it's an ism. In this case, it's alter from the Latin alter, which is other, so it's a principled otherism. And this ethic says the most important thing then is for individuals to put other people first and whatever is necessary on their part to sacrifice and suffer to enable the flourishing of the other, that's what we then have to do. So one other label I want to add here, or one other concept that's important here, is a concept of selflessness. And we'll take that literally. The individual has to internalize the idea that the self is of less importance than the needs of society. And when there is a conflict then between something that's of greater importance and something that's of lesser importance, it's the thing that's of lesser importance that has to suffer and sacrifice or renounce for the sake of the thing that is of greater importance. Okay, what this then is going to mean for education is that we're going to the extent we are ethical educators as altruists, put the social to the fore and be on the lookout and vigilant for cases where what the individual wants and is in conflict with what is social, and start as early as we possibly can teaching individuals the virtues of renunciation and sacrifice and putting the needs of others before their own. And to the extent that we then teach those values and get kids habituated to them, we're then putting them in a position to grow up as individuals who will be the right kind of individuals that are fit for social living being the most important value that we're striving to attain rather in our philosophical system.